I would like to thank, first of all, the German Center of Art History, um, Laura Karp, Elodie, um, and everyone that has worked in this panel. I would like also to thank Lara Demori, that is going to be the, she will give her views and a different voice to my work, which is wonderful. And of course, everyone that is here in New York quite early in the morning. And I thank very much. And I'm just miss it not to be able to see and to be with all of you, to be physically. I think this period, this 1 year period that we have had it, of isolation and alone, makes us very thirsty for embraces, for touch, for the smell of each other. And but at the same time, we have to thank COVID that we can all be together virtually from many different countries now. Um, so, said this, I would like to start it with by saying a little bit about history. And history for me has provided me with a methodology in the development of concepts in my artworks. It gives me a foundation and an understanding of how human beings have behaved and responded vis-a-vis events throughout the times. What it was before forecasts what it can be today. It gives me an anchor to the narratives. And time and space, memory and history, body and embodiment, politics, and the social momentum. These are issues that weave the netting of art making for me. And the female body was the first map, the foundation of my practice. We are born with odor and taste preferences, acquired from the amniotic fluid in the womb. What you like, what you don't like, may also be dependent of what smells you are exposed to in the uterus, said the scientist Thomas Hume. Airborne molecules enter our bodies and become for a moment part of us. Smells envelop ourselves in a haptic experience. Jennifer Plasnik, another scientist, found out that the olfactory receptors are located not only in the nose, but in other areas of the body, such as the kidney, lungs, and blood vessels. One of the first examples of our research confirmed that human sperm have olfactory receptors to sniff and swim towards the eggs. Olfaction has an affective dimension. It influences our mood and evokes psychological and emotional reactions. The olfactory tract transmits direct signals to the oldest areas of the human brain, the limbic system, that includes the amygdala, governing emotions, and the hippocampus, acting as a memory indexer by sending them to the appropriate part of the brain for long-term storage. Bypassing those parts of the brain responsible for language and cognition, according to Linda Buck, which was a Nobel Prize in 2004. Smell is the only sense that cannot be switched off. The brain scientist Johan Lundström has written that a great deal of processing odor is done in the unconscious level. Throughout modern times, smell, a social body, was presented as a tool of social division, inferiority, and domination. The stench of poverty and otherness had to be restrained and camouflaged, according to Alain Corbin. You may also see in the movie Parasite, where the smell of poverty identifies the class, and it becomes a very invisible element, but very powerful element of this movie. We would say that olfaction is an art of the in-between. It exists in the crevices. It changes with time. It intertwines present and past experiences. It establishes an interplay between oneself and the other. And yet it's unpredictable in how it affects each one of us. It's interactivity, it's emotional, it's fugitive. I've seen during the installations I have had it, how people, after sensing one smell, establish immediately conversations with anyone around. After a little while, they are sharing their memories and their stories. The evanescence of smells and the apprehension of its invisibility is an invitation to sense what the eyes don't see. Philosophers such as Plato place the highest value on the eye. Descartes and Hegel dismissed smell and taste as vulgar. And Kant wrote in 1798 that smell was the most dispensable of all senses. But it is Nietzsche that later wrote, "My genius is in my nostrils," which I think is fantastic, presenting smell as a metaphor for the invisibility that can perceive layers of concepts and philosophical truths. For him, the value of olfaction was a guide to discoveries, since a sight lacked the depth needed to enter the layers of perception. In this way, he broke with the reverence of the intellectual eye. Scientists have not been very interested in olfaction till Linda Buck and Richard Axwell won the Nobel Prize for their work on olfactory receptors in 2004. And now COVID-19, that mysterious virus that steals a sense of smells as it enters the bodies and places us in social isolation, is again igniting the interest of scientists. Perhaps now smells will be valued in contemporary art and will be part of the educational system and not like the ugly duck of all the senses. A very new research is the electronic nose called deep nose. Probably in about 50 years from now, an electronic olfactory will function as a nose to pick up scents in the body and as a brain to interpret them. We know today that dogs and rats are capable, if trained, of course, to diagnose diseases, such certain types of cancer, tuberculosis, and COVID. And so this knowledge would be transferred to this electronic brain, and doctors would be able to use this as the diagnosis. Smells are made up of layers or accords, classified as head or top notes, tiny light molecules that evaporate very fast. Heart nodes made up of denser particles, and the base nodes. What remains mostly with us, adding depth, richness, and actually behaving as a ground to the smell as a whole. To better sense smells, we should sniff like animals. To experience all the layers, we should learn to wait. To sense smells requires serenity, the peacefulness lacking in our culture today. A smell memory of my childhood was my introduction to the world of smells in the early 80s. The smell of fish was present only as a memory in image, sound, and poetry. But codfish cakes were served at the openings. It was only in 2009 that I was able to create smells as protagonists of my visual and sound installations, thanks to the support of Givaudan do Brasil, a multinational company devoted to fragrances and flavors, with whom I've been working till today. Human relationship to odors is very complex. It's made up of many confusing myths, cultural taboos, lack of scientific knowledge, and above all, a deeply rooted fear of the invisible. Smells have been understood for such a long time as a sense of madness and savagery that becomes difficult to make the change and see smells in a different manner. But why not? Shouldn't be. What is against madness? I don't have anything against madness. I think it's fabulous what the smells can take you. But the body was at that time very somewhat disconnected from itself in a way. As I watched the violent insurrection or coup d'etat of January 6th at the United States Capitol, I was thinking, what could have been the smells of violence inside that pristine historic space? I think these smells will be marked even after a lot of cleaning and washing the walls and all the places. In early 2000, I started an imaginary voyage of recognition of Brazil, my birth country, which I had left in 1964. This was a search for the smells of a forgotten nest of my growing up. It started with a photograph of a small bird that, in the process of building its nest, crashed towards its own image reflected on a glass window panel. A suicidal act, or just a fragile act of construction of a nest. The series Nidus Vitreo, glass nest, became the representation of this basic need to be sheltered in a moment in which the sense of home is threatened by wars, diasporas, instabilities, economics, pandemic, and future environmental migrations. The nest, the place where our first sense, olfaction, meets this primeval necessity of protection. Shelter as the first dwelling where we learn, according to Spinoza, to affect and to be affected by others. We are born alone. We build a protective shelter together in community with others. And yet, we think and die alone. But we smell throughout our life passage. That is an experience strongly associated with odors. As the physical body shuts off, it starts the process of decomposing. The body inhales the last smell as it exhales the last breath. Throughout history, the rites of death have been inseminated with an olfactory capacity. An interplay between life and death can be noticed by the molecules of putrescine and cadaverine. They are partly responsible for the smell of rotting flesh that accompanies the decomposition of organic material. The same molecules are part of the characteristic odor of semen. In olfactory terms, death and conception are deeply linked. Perhaps this vital continuity in death, putrefaction, rebirth was perceived in rural cultures where the odor of excrement was welcome because of its fertilization quality. Nidus Vitrium was a large and yet intimate construction of 1,000 branches molded in the fragility of glass resin and built with the strength of avian architecture. I constructed it with the knowledge of my bird companions. It was then, in 2009, that Givaudan do Brasil in São Paulo, this company I have already mentioned, support me in starting to make my first smell. I could not have done this without their assistance. I was able to create the first smell, the smell of a nest, emerging from the center of the sculpture and taking over the room in its entirety. And 3 other smells placed all around the space. They were wet earth, open sea, and hot sun, the smells of a collective shelter, our planet in danger of extinction. What could it be, the smell of a nest for you? Because of a reduced olfaction vocabulary, we needed to use metaphors and associations to create and describe it. Since others are related to individual experience, each person perceives the same smell differently and have different emotional reactions. For me, the smell of nest at that time was a mixture of sour breast milk, dirty diapers, fresh skin of a newborn baby, wet branches, broken twigs, sweet flying feathers, leaves, disinfectants, bacteria, mold, wet soil. It was how I started my communication process with a technician in Givaudan. I'm not interested in creating perfumes, far from that, but I'm interested in smells. And I'm also not interested in reproducing smells. And for me, my interest would be in creating smells that do not exist and can be something for me and something for you, different for you. Like a visual work in the same way. So from this working exchange with the technicians at that time, Givaudan, I learned that bringing a hint of a pleasing fragrance, it may reinforce the repulsiveness of some smells. Actually, to taste and smell something delicious, we needed to have experienced something disgustful. But most birds leave their nests. 1 year later, the last nest was abandoned, and its branches took new shapes for me, according to specifics of the space. It became shards of memories. Very early one morning, I was arranging my collection of broken wine glasses on the old black marble fireplace, right underneath my self-portrait, upside down. And I caught a whiff of breast sour milk odor in a shard of one of the broken glasses. One after another, the wine glasses broke, while I collected the pieces without questioning the reason. And now I question, why I hoard glass slivers? Why saving the cutting sharpness of shards? Could it be the need to have it at hand, a weapon to puncture or dig into my arteries? To have a penetrate instrument whose future function could be to make wrinkled skin bleed into death? Or would just be a shelter for individual and collective memories? It was the beginning of a new series, Shards, an olfactory artist book, photographs, and installations from 2011 ongoing. For the book Shards, it was glass and it broke. I invited 6 friends to write about the memory of the moment a wine glass breaks. The visual images in these stories impel me to create 6 smells: affection, pleasure, persistence, emptiness, absence, illusion. They were presented in a handmade paper box made of cigarette butts in a specific project by, this is in the University of Brasilia, by Therese Hoffman. And she has created, and she has even a patent to create a handmade paper out of cigarette butts. And in that one, we encapsulated the smell of glass that was created by Nadège Le Garlanzetec, which is a perfumist of Givaudan in Paris. But she did it the outside of the box. And the inside was done with all these texts. And the production was about 100 boxes of this book. I am passionate about glass, its transparency, its fragility, its 100% recycling quality, its reflection, strength when cracked and shattered. It is the representation of endangerment. The glass shards, the video, memory of glass, sound, and 13 smells materialized in the exhibit Glass Ceiling, shown in 2018 at the Museum of Contemporary Art in São Paulo.
Why I hoard glass slivers.
Para mim, a obra de arte é isso, é o caco, que aconteceu por acaso. Eu acho que esse momento é uma obra de arte.
The wine glasses broke, and I collected the pieces without questioning why. But their shards hold silent confidences.
Existia um cheiro nesses cacos, que parecia que era um cheiro de leite materno azedo.
Josely Carvalho é uma mulher forte e, sobretudo, uma artista engajada com o tempo e com as questões do tempo que ela vive.
O que vai ser mostrado agora tem todas essas camadas de questões sociopolíticas, as questões pessoais da artista, as questões do feminino e essa questão do olfato, que é um sentido ainda pouco trabalhado.
A concepção e a formulação desse cheiro passa pela subjetividade que é a Josely, e aí perceber essa obra de um outro jeito que é com mais sentido.
Toque, se aproxime, faça parte e quebre com essa santificação do museu.
The transparent glass urns are shattered in metaphors, the power of dissent. Today, the shards are a conquest. Emanates an intense, sensuous, narcotic smell of the Dama da Noite.
Cheiro do afeto, do gás lacrimogêneo, cheiro de brigadeiro, cheiro da bactéria, cheiro da barricada, cheiro de gardenia, cheiro da morte, cheiro do vazio.
Nós nos livramos dos nossos cacos. O artista encontra no caco a poesia da memória e consegue trazer isso para nós.
Parte da nossa vida é viver dentro desses limites. O cheiro não tem limite, o cheiro invade.
Archiving the odors of resilience in the blown glass nest is my delirium.
The smell of shards was encapsulated in this transparent silk curtain, and the public was forced to touch in order to enter the second space. And at this, a burst of very sharp notes of shattering nitriles, natural galbanum, metallic aldehydes envelop them and provoke a state of alertness. We use two types of encapsulation, a whiff of smell when passing through the curtain, and a very strong smell when you would touch and squeeze the material. And for this, I had the support of Anansi, a Brazilian company based in São Paulo and a pioneer in the use of nanotechnology. And the reason of using the nanotechnology also is the retention of the smell, while the liquid form volatilizes very fast, although smell is not permanent, which is one of its beauties. Crossing the curtain and sensing the smell of shards, the visitor then enters the second space and encounters his or her own reflection in the glass sculpture created from the shattered door, retrieved in 2013 protests, a protest that I participated in Rio de Janeiro. The sculpture, when I opened up the installation, had no name, it wasn't titled. But about 6-7 days afterwards, there was the killing and the assassination of Marielle Franco, a Black Brazilian politician and activist that was murdered by militia. This was March of 2018. And at that moment, I understood that I had done this sculpture for her. So the title is Marielle Franco today. And it is now part of the National Museum of Fine Arts in Rio de Janeiro collection. From my old collection of broken wine glasses, I enter metaphorically in a world of glass blowing in 2016 to create nests, shelters, urns as vessels for smells. The glass container is a fragile but durable visual representation of a shelter, while the smell retains its fugitive body. When something breaks, we usually throw it away. However, the ancient Japanese philosophy of kintsugi practices the art of putting broken pottery pieces back together with gold bonding. Kintsugi embraces imperfections, highlights rather than hides the scars, and celebrates these imperfections as part of the object's histories. When I make these glass sculptures, I don't make previous drawings for them. I enter into the studio with the excitement of unknown and of a dangerous territory. As we started the blowing process, it's when the works are taking shape and how they go, if they go to one direction or do they go to another. Do I squeeze? Do I think it's that touch? Although it's hard, of course, I don't touch with my hands, but I have pieces of wood in order to shape in this mold, soft glass, hot body. Glass, as I had mentioned earlier, is 100% recycled. And it's metaphorically, for me, this process of reconstruction through the act of breathing. We smell 23 times a day with every breath we take. Glass and smells have been companies throughout history. The installation Glass Ceiling was composed of 6 independent smells, formulated one smell for resilience. Although they were shown individually in the glass vessels that you saw in the video, we also encapsulated them in 6 crayons, allowing the public in a third room after that exhibit to draw with smell and to combine those 6 smells to make their own individual resilience. Of course, I cannot make the smell of resilience for anyone because each one of us will make our own. And the smells were pepper from pepper spray, lacrima for the smell of tear gas, anoxia for the smell of bacteria, bombs, barricade made up of burning tires as a protection from the police, dust from the crumbling buildings, and the queen of the night, Cestrum nocturno, a small white nocturnal flower, almost invisible, but with an intoxicating smell, representing on this installation the female sensibility as an alternative for the division we live today. wars, smell. Rather than looking for what may be known for the real smells of battles, I wanted the smells to behave as catalysts, connecting the history of these military cannons and the places where they were stationed since the time of Portugal, France, England, Netherlands invaded Brazil to the present social and political moment. I'm not a historian, therefore, I allowed myself a poetic license to bring an unauthorized history of Brazil. Colonialism is still present today in our ideas of power, race, class, culture, gender, sexuality. And as a small example, that is in one of the canons, is the genocide of the indigenous communities since Europeans' arrival in Brazil from the 1500s on. It still continues today in the middle of a pandemic when a president disregards them, their land and their identities, closing the eyes for the landowners that invade and burn the indigenous lands. Within the Smells of History was postponed from last year to early 2022, depending on COVID, nothing is sure yet. And it was to happen at the National Museum of History in Rio de Janeiro. It evokes personal and collective historical events to olfaction. It is the first time I make an installation where I have created only smells, because I borrow from the collection of the museum, the canons. So smells such as invasion, smell of fear, smell of death, absence, and others, they are inserted into 20 military canons from the collection, connecting and constructing a new interpretation of Brazilian history. The canons become olfactory time tunnels between the early patterns of colonization and its residues is still ingrained in Brazilian culture. This garden of cannons, as you see, it's made up of 40 military cannons. And as you will be able to see in the next photo, it's how I insert the smell inside of the cannon. And these smells are done with the collaboration with the perfumist Leandro Petit from Givaudan do Brasil. In mid-March, I lost my sense of smell for about 2 weeks. My body had been invaded by an invisible creature, COVID-19, provoking fear of anoxia and fear of death. But I had already created these smells in January, before the pandemic. As the exhibit was postponed right then, 15 days before opening, I started created a site as a container of the histories and the smells from the canons. At that moment, the installation did not exist, but existed virtually now as a place for the public interaction. Since the vocabulary for smells is so reduced, I thought it could be interesting to leave it on the site so the public can imagine, after reading the history of each one of these canons. How could it be these smells? What would it be? And maybe they'll be able to come up with a new vocabulary to describe the smells in their own imagination. Visitors will stick their noses to be able to smell inside of the canon. Could it be a meditation on war? Fear can be communicated through sweat and possibly creating a chain reaction. Most of us have experienced it with COVID-19. Ants that suffer attacks in their nests produce pheromones of alarm, awakening a defensive reaction within the colony. To create the salty smell of fear, we added the escatol, indole to bring forth the smell of urine, sweat, and feces that accompany many moments of panic. Although the female body has been central to my artwork, the male figure inhabited up to now only its borders. In the Garden of Canons, we are surrounded by 40 large pinas, lingers of masculinity. They have been the symbols of the military, economic, and sexual power throughout history. I did ask myself, what am I doing here? How did I choose to be here? And how could the female sensibility have a place in this garden of power? So, as a woman, I penetrated metaphorically in these large time tunnel canons, phallus, in search of past histories and smells forgotten in their rusted iron walls. I found smells of fear, invasion, delirium, affection, absence, persistence, illusion, ocean, rainforest, incense, anoxia, death. Today, the glamorization of firearms is increasing the desire for objects of power. And patriarchal societies still lead to sexual harassment, rape, and femicide in many parts of the world, including Brazil. As we were stricken by the pandemic, I understood the canons as macro metaphors for the micro COVID-19 invasion. Yesterday, the canon sent heavy, noisy, smelly, deadly iron balls, destroying bodies and shelters in the process of invasion and colonization. While the coronavirus today invades us in silence, invades our bodies, stealing our sense of smell and taste. And fearful, we feel the loss of touch, affection, love, and even life. The fear and anxiety from the individuals affected by domination brought by invasions is represented in the smell of invasion by animalic, phenolic, and foul notes found in osmanthus, and the violence is evoked by the smell of lacerations and metallic notes of blood brought by castoreum, oud, and musk in the composition. Beginning from the assumption that each person has their own smell when dying, we first ask, what could it be the smells of death in history? Research from the University of Huddersfield in England raised the possibility that each body after death develops a unique odor. This odor of death comes from the liberation of chemical substances in the body. It could then be said that the body leaves a kind of olfactory digital impression. The body, right after death, exhales exhanol. As the time passes, a smell similar to nail polish begins to emit from the decaying body. This mortar was made in an emergency in Rio Grande do Sul, a southern state of Brazil, to be utilized in the revolution of 1930. It was made of a sewage iron tube. The movement was led by Getúlio Vargas, an ambiguous figure who, despite maintaining the country for 15 years under authoritarian and dictatorial regime, created also a labor and populist policies. As an example, in 1932, the women's right to vote was declared, as well as the introduction of women in politics. In 1934, the doctor and feminist Carlota Pereira de Queiroz became the first Brazilian congresswoman. And yet, in the last few years, Dilma Rousseff, the first and only woman president in Brazil, was impeached in a coup. Easier done, probably because she was a woman. Women are still struggling to be part of the political process. I recall my love for the beauty of this tree, Curupita guianensis. It's native of Brazil and also is known as the cannonball tree. Its smells have not been much explored in perfumery. The tree grows beautiful, aromatic, and spicy flower blossoms alongside with fruits, the size and weight of cannonballs. In contrast to these aromatic and sensuous flowers, the fruit, when falls into the floor, erupts, dispersing a foul, fatty, sulfuric smell, like that of a body in decomposition. We took it one ball in Rio, because you don't find this tree in São Paulo, and took it to São Paulo, to Givaudan, that used scent track, a patent form of smell extraction without destroying the flora. And then they were able to extract the essential oil. So with the combination of the flower fragrance amid the foul fruit odor, we created the female-male fragrance to become central in this installation within the smells of history. Inside the oldest cannon mouth of the museum's collection, I found inside there the smell of affection. Conversing with the museum's historians, I also felt that affection for the beauty and preciousness of this collection. I imagined a pleasant fragrance with sweet notes of coumarin, maltol, amber, a smell that reproduced family childhood moments of burnt sugar, condensed milk, and balsamic notes. Could the soldiers, in fear of death, fantasize with moments of childish joy and the affection of grandma's cakes? It's a smell that provokes an appetite for life. We start the talk with the memory of a smell. Travel through personal and collective shards. Enter into the garden of cannons with its massive death machines and foul odors. And I would like to end with the smell of the Queen of the Night in Affectio, an installation shown last year at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Rio de Janeiro.
Aquele cheiro que arde, ele vai arder, sempre. Aquele cheiro que sufoca, vai sempre sufocar.
Se eu fosse fazer um cheiro para esse quadro, seria o cheiro do medo aqui. É o cheiro do suor.
Em algum lugar, ainda que seja nessa fina teia da percepção, esses cheiros, eles carregam ideias, eles carregam conceitos.
O que é esse cheiro para você?
A Joseli, ela participou até pouco tempo da Radical Women, que é uma exposição de artistas ativistas da década de 80.
Ela trabalha intensamente num diálogo político com a realidade.
O Museu Nacional de Belas Artes se tornou uma casa. O primeiro cheiro, que foi o cheiro do ninho, eu fiz aqui no museu. E agora estou voltando 10 anos depois. Aqui é muito bonito porque diz: há lágrimas nas coisas e tocam a alma dos mortais.
Vai ser uma exposição que as pessoas vão poder dialogar muito, compartilhar esses sentimentos, sensações, memórias, e que vai provocar muitas pessoas a pensar e a terem uma experiência, né? Sair daqui diferente do que quando entrou.
Aqui a Marielle Franco, que fica exatamente na parte principal e em frente à Avenida Rio Branco, vendo o que foram as passeatas até pouco tempo atrás.
A obra Marielle Franco dialoga com o nosso maior item do acervo, que é o prédio do museu.
A própria obra é o olfato, né? Que é um sentido muito pouco discutido na arte contemporânea.
A beleza da arte contemporânea é a gente aprender a ler com os nossos outros sentidos. A gente quer falar do corpo todo, como, né, um receptor estético.
Cada obra da Joseli foi pensada para se relacionar com alguma outra específica.
Então, quando a gente coloca essas obras da Joseli junto com obras antigas, a gente faz uma relação e vê que, na realidade, as obras falam sobre questões humanas.
Esses cheiros, eles estão baseados nas manifestações e nos protestos. Então aqui começa com o gás lacrimogêneo. Os bandeirantes do Bernardelli foi escolhida pelo significado onde o indígena aparece amarrado dentro dessa floresta. O cheiro, ele vem tanto do gás lacrimogêneo como também de uma lágrima.
Ela permeia os nossos sofrimentos, as nossas dores, com cheiros que marcam.
Os cheiros tomaram outras discussões. Ficou mais perigoso com essa ideia do infiltrar o museu, como protesto. Então, numa certa maneira, eu também me sinto um cheiro.
Depois dos cheiros pesados, você encontra a Dama da Noite ali como uma espécie de dica, talvez. E é isso que eu acho interessante, porque não afirma nada, ela provoca perguntas.
Entrar em contato com a obra do Joseli é a possibilidade de nos descobrirmos como uma potência.
A dama está sozinha. Ela encontrou seu canto solitário. Todo cheiro é uma meditação.
Hey!